seconds to get settled, so bear with us. We will be starting shortly. Well, good afternoon, everyone. We are excited to be bringing you another Money Matters series from Richmond Neighborhood Housing Services, talking about finances and COVID-19. As you heard us speaking, I hope everyone is keeping cool and hydrated because it is hot, depending on where you are in the part of the Bay Area. For those that may not be familiar with our organization, we're an affordable housing organization established in 1989. Oh, not 1989, 1981. Sorry, that must have been a magical year for me. It was started by Richmond residents addressing redlining issues in the city of Richmond. We have grown to become affordable housing organization supporting both Alameda, Contra Costa County, primarily in the affordable housing realm, where we're property manager owners of single family properties in Richmond as landlords, which you're going to hear a lot about tonight. And I cannot emphasize, by taking this journey, you will want to be highly educated in what it means to be a landlord, because it is one thing to get a property, but it's a whole nother thing to manage it and manage your tenants. I digress. But then also we are a HUD approved counseling agency, which brings education courses like this to you. So I'm hoping that we have a number of folks on the phone from different areas, people just thinking about investing in real estate, already owning real estate, but wanting to get educated more, or some of our first-time home buyers. And if you are a first-time home buyer, you are in the right place, because as much information as you need to get prior to making a real estate transaction, we encourage. But if you are going to be looking for any subsidies or down payment assistance, one of the things that are going to be required in many cases is a HUD-approved education course, which we provide. So if you haven't signed up, or if you haven't seen information on our distribution list, know that starting next week, we will be starting our virtual session. So we're excited to see how that's going to work. Typically, prior to COVID, it would be an 8-hour Saturday class, or maybe a couple of nights throughout the week getting that 8-hour curriculum in. And we have to really adhere to that curriculum because it is a HUD class. So we've broken it up in 4 weeks. So every Thursday for the month of June, we'll be meeting. So if you want more information on that, contact us or put something in the chat bar. We'll be happy to help you with that. And then lastly, we do a lot of advocacy. We support tenant rights. We also work with community organizations as it relates to the Community Reinvestment Act, which is really important because many of the programs that you have access to as a first-time home buyer are required by banks under CRA, which is critically important. And one thing that I also forgot is that we are developers currently developing in West Oakland. So that's who we are. And on the stage, we have Simone Gorey, who is our property and finance manager at our organization. And then we have our speaker, who I respect quite a bit and really deem him as an expert in real estate and commercial real estate at that, Mr. Steve Peterson. He'll definitely share, the work that he's doing and all the accolades that he has as far as really being a subject matter expert in this conversation. So with that, I want to make sure that everyone's familiar with Zoom. Don't want to make any assumptions. At your bottom toolbar, you have the mute and video option. And because this is a webinar, you won't have access to video, and we have you all on mute. So the way that you'll be able to engage with us is in the Q&A section. If you have a question, and please, let's make this a dialogue. Steve does have a presentation, but we want to make sure your questions are answered. So please use the Q&A. If there are, side notes that you need just to chat with us, you can use that, but please use the Q&A for your questions. And this session will be recorded and up on our website. So if you want to refer back to it, share with friends and family, you'll have access to it as well. So thank you for being here, Steve. Thank you to our audience, and let's have a conversation about real estate investing.
Let's do it. Let's do it. Well, thank you, Nikki and Simone, for having me on. Thank you, Richmond Neighborhood Housing, all the people that's listening. Much love and respect to y'all. And this is a very important topic that I think we need to be talking about, particularly as it relates to, real estate and investing. And whether you're buying your first home or you aspire to buy your first home, or you are a homeowner looking to move into owning investment real estate, this conversation is really critical, especially during this time. I mean, there's a lot of interesting information circling around nowadays, because you got a situation where our whole way of life has been altered, if you will, and not just here in the United States, but throughout the world. And you've got 30 some, almost 40 million people having filed unemployment, multiple businesses, majority of businesses, getting assistance. And yet and still home prices somehow are going up in the Bay Area. Stock market somehow is shooting up. And so people are just trying to figure out what's going on. So I think today will be great because we'll dive into the basics of real estate investing. And in my presentation, we'll talk about, multifamily and some of the, things you need to look out and how to educate yourself to that. And if you're a homeowner or wanting to be a homeowner, you'll understand how particularly that relates to what you're trying to do, and then trying to make sense of it all during this time. And this is certainly, a very unique time. Many of us, when it first hit, thought, hey, housing market's going to be very, difficult. Housing market's going to be it's going to drop. It's going to, do all this stuff. And right now it's a weird time because, like I said, house prices in the Bay, at least, have gone up again somehow. Right. And a big part of that is because there's a lot of stimulus money pumped in the economy, a lot of mortgage money out there. But when you on the street, in the sense of, when I say on the street, meaning that you live in real life and you're dealing with your, daily family job. I mean, a lot of us went from doing your regular job to then, trying to do something online. If you got kids, you all of a sudden become a teacher. I'm a principal at my house, you know what I mean? So my wife is the teacher. I'm the principal. I come in there, handling all the issues while trying to run a business, while trying to figure out if we're going to take the risk to go grab some groceries today, putting masks on and doing all of that stuff without, outside of regularity has been very, very challenging. And so some of the keys, and I'll get into my presentation in a minute, but I think some of the keys that I've been sharing with my team, and I run a real estate brokerage, 17 agents that work for me in the brokerage. We started in November 2009. And one thing that I've been consistently hammering with my team, with my family, is focusing on doing what you can do, where you are, when you can do it consistently. Meaning that it's very easy to just sit back, turn on the Netflix, and kick back, especially if you're getting the unemployment. A lot of people are getting unemployment money that was more than their job was paying. So a lot of folks just like, hey, I got this unemployment. I'm kicking back. It's all good. We're going to come back into it. A lot of business owners, okay, have gotten money from the PPP or the idle loans. And it's like, yo, I know a couple people got 100,000 plus. And it's like, hey, that's a nice chunk of change. And all of a sudden it feels like maybe this COVID thing ain't so bad. But the key you need to remember, everything that glitter ain't gold. Okay. And regardless of your situation and circumstances, there's some stuff going on. I can't tell you all the logistics around it, but what I can tell you, now is not the time to all the way kick back. Now is not the time to all the way rest and on your laurels, so to speak, and relax and just be thinking it's all good, because it ain't all good. And for us, I'm from Oakland, born and raised. I know a lot of y'all is in the Richmond area. Anytime there's significant damage to the economy, the lower income, lower to moderate income areas and folk going to feel it way harder than everyone else. And so as we come out of this, and when I mean come out of it, when we get back to, being able to go outside and we get back to out of this grace zone. Right now, I think we're in a grace period because many homeowners, if you own a home, you got 90 days. And now I got a letter from my bank saying, hey, we're extending it, another 90 days, and a lot of people are getting extensions on their payments and then another 90 days extension, not having to make payments, which is fantastic. I'm glad that they did that. But what it is at some point, we're all going to have to go back to making mortgage payments. The courts are closed. So landlords, they can't even file an eviction. Banks, they can't even file default. So at some point, we come out of that, right? And that's where the rubber meets the road, y'all. And that's where I would like y'all, all of us who are tapped into this, to be diligent and vigilant about our affairs. We cannot just sit back and get a couple of checks from the government and think it's all good. And we cannot rely on stimulus money or PPP money. And some of us ain't even got that. A lot of people maybe applied, didn't get it and all that. But a lot of people I see who have got it, I see them kicking back too hard. And I just know, having built my business in the last Great Recession, having been around in that time, that this is the time to sharpen your axe, to get information, to make connections, to come up with a plan, to think ahead, think 3 to 5 years down the line, think where you want to be, where do your family want to be. And we can't trust this system, and now I'm not saying we need to be anarchy, whatever, but if you Black, brown, lower to moderate income, you can't trust the system. What you need to do is figure out how to become sustainable yourself in this crazy world that we are in the United States, particularly in the Bay Area, even more, because everything is expensive. Home ownership is tough, but it's worth it. Nikki talked about that 8-hour class. I bought my home in January 2015, and I've been in real estate my whole adult life since 2003. When I took that class and I sat down, me and my wife, I learned a lot. And I was at the time a real estate broker running my own business, right? I sat my butt in that class and I learned a lot. And a lot of people say, I don't want to, they want to get the house, they want to get the property, but they don't want to sit up in that class. You're going to learn a lot in that class. You're going to learn a lot tonight. There's YouTubes out there that you can go out, Zooms. Now is the time for that. It's not time to fall back and relax. So I wanted to just set the stage with that before I go into the presentation, because that's what we're doing. We used to meet as a company every other week on Friday. Now we meet every single Friday. I used to do, as content out there, I used to do maybe 1 or 2 videos a month. Now I'm doing 1 or 2 videos a week, and I think it's that important. And I'm rocking at my home office until many nights, 12 or 1 o'clock at night, because I don't know exactly what is around the corner, but looking at the last 400 years of the history of this country, looking at the last Great Recession that we went through, I'm not depending on nobody. I'm not, trusting, the system, they're not going to foreclose on people. They're not going to do. I'm trying to be prepared for any and everything, and I suggest we do the same. And here's the thing: I want y'all to understand, this is a huge opportunity. We come out of this if prices, soften, and if sellers are more negotiable, which I believe we'll see, this could be a huge buying opportunity for Black and brown folks in the Bay Area. And so I want you to take that understanding as we go into this presentation. And it's been tough the last few years. You're trying to buy properties, cash buyers, multiple offers. It has been tough, right?
And Steve, I thank you for that. And I think you're validating and supporting really our call to action to say this is not the time to wait, to keep your eye on the prize. Do not get distracted. There's real life happening out there. But there's a lot of folks that have said it, that they have made opportunity out of crisis. And in other communities, we tend to isolate and shut down. And this is the time to take advantage of opportunities if you're in position. Even though our organization has been working remotely, we're still working with getting people into homes, working with lenders. So the opportunities are there. So I appreciate you being frank and candid. And to pivot in before the presentation, you mentioned something. You started your business in '09, and that was right in the
Oh yeah.
wave of the down market. So what do you see the difference of the speculation, what was experienced in '07 through almost 2011 to what you're hearing now? What do you see the biggest differences and where some of the opportunities may be that weren't there before?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think the biggest difference, number one, is it was in that time, it was a sharp decline. So there was two major drops that happened. It was in the spring 2007 when many of the banks, the residential banks failed. And then we start seeing a lot of short sales and foreclosures. But it was not a mass drop in prices. It wasn't a mass drop in prices until October 2008 where the commercial real estate market, the stock market, economy as a whole jumped off a cliff. And it was not a gradual decline. It was a jump off the cliff. And really, it was all financially related, meaning that the financial products of the world had failed. And everything, and most things revolve around financing, especially in America. So everything was affected, but it was a sharp, drastic decline. We Prices were falling. There was not lending. There was no lending available. The stimulus money that was put out there was really to keep big companies from failing, which would have created an even worse situation. And whether we agree with what they did or not, I certainly think Obama came in and did what he needed to do to hold things up, and you see what happened after that. But the bottom line is that was a sharp decline quickly. There was not mortgage money for the individual or people wanting to lend. Most of the stimulus was done to bigger companies just to keep the banks to keep the system from crashing. This is different in the sense of the pandemic has disrupted the way of life, the way we do things, which has disrupted the entire economy, right? Which could even be worse. What is propping things up is that the government has come in and said, "Hey, we're going to get money in the hands of people and businesses." It wasn't like the big banks of the world need to get bailed out. It was like we're telling people not to go to work, not to go to business. So we're going to put money in their hands. We're going to put money in those companies' hands. We're going to, you make, like, if you want to go get a mortgage right now, there's all kind of mortgage money available. Back in '08, in our real estate office, for instance, there was about 100 agents. And from October '08 to maybe May of '09, there was only, of 100 agents, about 6 deals that closed. I mean, and all of us, or most of us, were, that's how we feed our families. And I closed 2 of those deals. And I remember those times. I remember eating top ramens, beans and rice. And for me, and how I was able to start my company at that time, top ramens and beans and rice actually wasn't a foreign thing. I grew up on that. And so I was able to put my nose to the grindstone and grind. And a lot of people in my office, they didn't know. A lot of people got out of the business. And that's why I'm telling y'all that we have a resiliency, having come through everything we've come through in this country, that if we can, you know, harness that, we could actually rock out of this. We can actually make some moves. And I think the opportunities then were, properties were pennies on the dollar. And I mean pennies on the dollar. There were several properties in Oakland, houses under 100,000, fourplexes under 150, 200,000 that you could buy. I sold a 61 unit apartment building for 450,000 in 2010. So different in the sense that today prices have not dropped off a cliff. And in fact, what's weird is single family home prices have actually gone up, if you can believe it. Stock market, it crashed immediately, but then went right back up. However, investment property is in a challenging space right now because investors are always looking in the future, and they're not buying what's going on. They're not saying, "Hey, everything's going to be okay." They're saying, "I need to prepare for the worst." Homeowners a lot of times are saying, "I need to get into this neighborhood. I need to get into this school district. I need to get it. I need to stop paying $4,000 a month for rent." So it's a different different marketplaces. So that's the biggest difference, is that in the past there was a financial crisis that caused prices to drop immediately. This is a global disruption which has taken 30 to 40% of the economy away or put it on ice. But U.S. government has shoveled all this cash into the system, which is propping it up for now. But we'll see. Opportunity-wise, I think there will still be opportunities to buy properties at discounts, maybe not 70% discounts, but where you don't have to outbid to get them. But I think a lot of those opportunities are going to be in months, and maybe not right now, as we're kind of falsely propped up. So I don't know if that makes sense, but trying to make,
I mean,
you know what
I
I mean?
think it makes a lot of sense, and I appreciate you kind of sharing the motivation behind a seller. So a
Yeah,
rental, it's more immediate, or not, excuse me, not a rental, but a purchase. You're motivated because either you don't like the way where you're living, or the rent's too high. There's a motivation more on the buyer side than the seller side. And then I'm hearing from the rental standpoint, the motivations are a lot different, of why you would go down that path. So,
right.
and then also from an investment standpoint, the prices could be going down a little bit because the motivations are different. Because
Absolutely.
because what we're finding is from the investment market, being a landlord isn't as sexy as it used to be because of the tenant protections and all. So we're not seeing
Yeah.
this big wave of investors coming in buying all the property, because there are ordinances and things that people need to adhere to. And I
Yeah.
think this is a good segue to the presentation. And I really do, again, appreciate your frankness of really talking about the market, what it was, where the
Yeah.
opportunities are today. And not saying that it's all easy, but if you want it, it's available. And I'm assuming tonight you'll share with people how they can make that happen.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And that's the key. I think if you want to go after this, you can do it. And that's, I mean, with so many things in business and life, that's the case. But particularly with home ownership and investment property ownership, you can do it. First, let's start with that. Now, how do we do it? The logistics of it. I'll talk about that through the presentation as we get into it. But the bottom line is understand that this is possible. And the biggest thing that I saw last market crash that hurt was, I would be presenting properties in East Oakland and West Oakland, let's say, right? I remember clearly there was a fourplex in West Oakland for like 170,000 that I presented to a couple people. And I knew it was a great price because I was in the market before and I saw the price drop. Fourplexes in that neighborhood were 700,000 to 800,000 before. So when it dropped to 100 something thousand, I knew it was a great deal. But I had multiple people, Black folks from the neighborhood, said, I don't want to go into that neighborhood. I don't want to deal with those folks. I don't want to buy. I don't know where the real estate market's going. That was the time to buy. And what happened is people were not educated to the process. The biggest thing they didn't understand was the income and expenses and the relationship of the income and expenses. A lot of people just think real estate in terms of values, right? Um, and values are important, but more important, especially when talking about investment property, is the relationship of the income and expenses. At that time, 2 bedrooms in that area were renting out $1,100, $1,200. So if you buy something for 100 something thousand and you're bringing in 4,000 a month, your mortgage is going to be less than $1,000 a month. Your expenses are probably going to be 2,000. So you're making $2,000 a month. And if you bought it for 100,000 something, you probably put down maybe 30 something thousand. So if you put $30,000 down and you're making 2,000 a month, that's 24,000 a year. That's insane amount of return. You almost made all your money back in year one. And now if you would have held that property from then to now, you're a millionaire. So the thing that hurt a lot was that we didn't realize the opportunity that was in front of our face because of the pain that we were going through. And that's what that's my main message that I want to drive, because we may be going through some pain. And I don't know how this is. None of us know how this is going to all sort itself out. But if we prepared for a tough situation, let's just say, and we prepared our mind for that, of how to think through it, and it wasn't so bad, then we would be better off. But if we prepared for a tough situation and it was very difficult, we would be extremely ahead of the curve, extremely ahead, and be able to make some power moves for our families, man, be able to make some wealth building, generational wealth building moves for our neighborhoods and communities. And I think we may have that opportunity again. Again, prices are not going to jump off the cliff because this is a different situation, but I do think there'll be more negotiable sellers. I think you'll have more opportunities as buyers to get in there. And I'm excited to lead people, through the waters, so to speak. And we've been doing a lot of that because it requires more now. Every deal, every transaction just requires more. So we're putting it in. So I want to make sure I am ready to get into this presentation. I'm seeing a poll up on there. I don't know if you guys see the poll, but definitely make sure y'all tap into that poll so we can understand kind of where you guys are coming from and give you the necessary feedback. And so I'm actually gonna fill out the poll myself. But I'm ready for that presentation, guys. If you want to pull it up.
Okay. So Simone will work on getting the presentation up, and thank you guys for taking the time to do the poll. One, I want to make sure, I hate the fact that I can't see all the faces, but it is a way to keep people interactive. But as Steve is talking, please make sure that you have any questions you have in the Q&A portion. It looks like the majority of people who have filled out the poll do not have family members or friends who own multiple properties, so they're going to be the first in their circle to do it. Many of the folks are not homeowners, so we do want to talk to, and Steve, even though your focus is commercial, I know you also do residential, and as a first-time home buyer, knowing that you can buy multiple properties under community lending programs, so be able to speak to that. So for number 2, you can hit both in one shot. And it seems that most people would be comfortable in collecting rents. And I think we may have one more. Do you understand the relationship between rents and expenses? You talked a little bit about that, but the majority of folks do understand that. But for the folks that do not, can you just clarify that? And then I think we'll be ready to get into the presentation about the relationship of rents and expenses.
Yeah, and as I go through the presentation, it'll become made really clear. But just understand, for once you have more than one unit, not that big of a deal when it's just a house. But let's just say you bought a fourplex and you're gonna move into that fourplex and live in one of the units. Something that I really advise a lot of first-time home buyers to do, and a lot of people don't realize that they can do that. But understanding that the income that you bring in from the rents minus the expenses you have to pay out. So your mortgage is one expense, but your mortgage is not even the operating expense. So if you pay cash for a building, you're still going to have to pay taxes, insurance, maintenance, management, lawn care, pest control, things of that nature. So what I was saying earlier is that a lot of people didn't understand. They were just thinking about real estate in terms of value. They didn't understand the relationship between income and expenses. If you can understand that, you can own real estate and buy real estate in down markets and make a lot of money, because that's actually the better time to buy. And if you understand that, you can navigate through good markets, bad markets, rental laws, tough situations. That's something that's really critical. So just understanding that difference. Now, once we get into 5+ unit apartment buildings, which I'm going to talk to y'all, I want everybody to have an understanding of that. You may not be ready for that now, but if you have an understanding of it, that relates to buying a house. That relates to buying a fourplex. And then once you get that house, once you get that fourplex, you will at least have the knowledge to understand the big leagues. And if you so choose to get up into it, you can do it. And so I'm gonna go into it now. And my presentation is the intro to multifamily and commercial real estate investing. I'm gonna be talking mostly about multifamily today. So look at it through a lens of an investor. And even if you're buying your own home to move into, guess what? It's an investment. Maybe one of the biggest investments you'll ever make. Certainly the most important, because that's where you're gonna be laying your head. So we can move on to the next slide and tell you a little bit about, kind of myself and the company. My name's Steve Peterson. CCIM stands for Certified Commercial Investment Member. That's a designation you get in commercial real estate. I started my company, Infinity Investments, in November 2009. Nikki mentioned that was a very difficult time, and it was. But I was doing deals. I worked with the investors. I was doing business prior. I started in real estate in 2003. So I knew that there was some huge opportunity. So I got in. 10, almost 11 years later, here we are. Now, also, I had the honor and pleasure to serve as the president of the California Association of Real Estate Brokers, also the Associated Real Property Brokers. And what those are, California Association of Real Estate Brokers is KRAB, and Associated Real Property Brokers, that's ARPB. Those are the state and local, ARPB is for Oakland, chapters of NARAB. NARAB is the National Association of Real Estate Brokers, which is the Black Brokerage Association. And we stand for democracy in housing. We are called realtors. Quick fact on that is many people don't know what a realtor is. So many people know what realtor is, but blacks and other minorities were not allowed to join the Realtor Association. So back in 1947, the realtors were formed as a ways and a means for blacks to be able to perform real estate duties, to know where properties were, and to stand for democracy in housing. We fought for all the fair housing laws on Capitol Hills of Washington and our respective states. So that's what we do as realtors. I had that honor and pleasure. I also was the president of NorCal CCIM in 2018. And CCIM, like I said, is a designation that you get, but more importantly, it's a network of people. Particularly that one is for commercial real estate. And I was the first and only African-American to serve as president, and it was my honor. So a little bit about me and my experience. The company, we focus on multifamily properties, the sale and acquisition of small to mid-size apartment buildings. Now, we do other real estate, residential, and other commercial real estate, but our sweet spot, our focus, our claim to fame, if you will, is small to mid-sized apartment buildings. This is my passion. I lived in a lot of apartment buildings. If y'all know about Oakland, I grew up in the 69th Village. I lived in the 80s and in the 90s in the apartment units in some really tough neighborhoods. I done slept with roaches as my companions, if you will. So I had a passion about housing because when I got in the business, I wanted to be able to get in apartments and make a difference. Also make some money, but I haven't grew up in those tough environments. I will always look and say about the building, wow, the landlord should come and do this. The landlord can come and do that. So my thought when I was a kid, and I played football, I was going to go to the NFL and make all these millions. And I said, when I get my millions, I'm going to go in and buy up all these properties in East Oakland and get rid of these roaches. That was my thing because I lived with all them roaches. So I didn't like them. So I was, so that was kind of what got me into apartment buildings and why I'm so passionate in apartment buildings. And we move on to the next one. And I'll tell you also economically why I think in the next slide that apartment buildings, and now here's the deal. Let me qualify this real quick. When I say multifamily covers two main sectors of the business: 2 to 4 units, which is residential; 5+ units, which is commercial. And here's the big difference: 2 to 4 units, you can get a residential loan. In fact, you can get an FHA loan, and you can even, in some instances, marry that FHA loan with down payment assistance. Not all the time, but in some cases you can. But the bottom line is you can buy a fourplex with 3.5% down plus closing costs. A lot of folks don't know that. I think that's the best thing to do if you're looking for a home first time, because you can combine your home and your investment. Now, 5+ units is still multifamily, it's still residences, but it's commercial real estate. And the reason it's commercial real estate is because the financing is now commercial financing. 2 to 4 units, residential income, residential financing. 5+ units, commercial financing. Okay, the difference is you buy 5+ unit apartment building, typically you're gonna have to put 25 to 30% down, sometimes 30 to 35% down. Okay, because the banks perceive a higher level of risk. So that's one of the big differences there. But whether it's 2 to 4 units, whether it's 5+ units, we love multifamily properties because the stable cash flow during the holding period. That means the holding period is the life that you own the property. And apartment buildings tend to do better than single family homes if you're investing in single family homes or strip centers or hotels, because people need somewhere to stay, and the occupancy rates are higher historically and currently. Even in a pandemic, even in the Great Recession, occupancy rates stayed high, meaning that the rate of people who occupy that building is higher than, let's say, a hotel, or higher than, let's say, an office building, you know. But it also has attractive financing. Many people don't know that you can get an FHA loan or Fannie Mae or Freddie Mac loan for a 5+ unit apartment building. In fact, the biggest deal I ever worked on was a $24 million apartment building acquisition that had a FHA loan on it. So a lot of people don't know that. They think FHA is only for residential. Absolutely wrong. They have FHA and Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac loans for apartment buildings. Now, economies of scale, that's SFR stands for single family residence, and that's a house. So apartments have a better economies of scale because, let's just say you have a house and it's rented out. When that tenant moves out, your house is 100% vacant. Now you got to fix it up. Now you got to find another tenant. That whole time you ain't getting no rent. Let's just say you had 10 units. Somebody moves out, 2 people move out, let's say. You got to fix it up and get it rented, but you have rents coming in from 8 other units. So that's what I mean, economies of scale that single family homes don't offer. Now, excellent generator and preserver of wealth. So if you don't got no money and you're trying to make your mark and build up, it's a great way to, like I told you, you can buy a fourplex, duplex, and fourplex with 3.5% down. You can get in like that. And then that thing's gonna grow in value. You can sell that, then go get you another apartment building. So it's a great way to kind of come up in the world. If you do have some money, you came up, you got a couple of dollars, it's a great place to preserve it, okay? Values typically are gonna hold better than most other properties, right? And then I put this little note in here, and it says prices in the current market. Prices in the Great Recession dropped more than 50%. So that's a typo here. Prices in the Great Recession dropped more than 50% in many places. Oakland, yes, more than 50%. Stockton, yes, the roll everywhere. But the rents only dropped about 5 to 10%. Remember that relationship between rents and expenses? And I'll show you the relationship between value. That's why we love multifamily property. The prices dropped, but the rents really didn't. People got to live somewhere. Next slide. And that's an important part of real estate, that it is, one of the basic needs of life, right? Food, water, shelter. That shelter is pretty important. Now we in shelter in place. If you got the type of shelter that you want, or you got control over your shelter, you can feel a little bit better about it. And if you're not in that situation, don't trip, but just understand it's an important thing to aspire towards. Now, everything that glitter ain't gold. I said that before, and every property ain't a great buy. So you have to evaluate it. And what we do, we looked at some key indicators. Cash flow, number one. The net operating income, that stands for NOI, and the details surrounding that. That's very, very important, okay? The price in relationship to the cap rate. I'll explain what a cap rate is. The return on investment in relationship to the return on equity, and the cash on cash, and the internal rate of return. These are some indicators to help you to make decisions on whether that property is good. Now, if you're looking at a home to buy, let's just say, you may be looking school district, okay, transportation. Is the neighborhood close to, a BART? Is it close to freeways? Crime, things of that nature. So we use these indicators in the investment business like a homeowner would use neighborhood, school district, is it 3 bedrooms, 2 bedrooms, backyards, all of that, okay? The same principle. So that's why I want you to keep that in mind. You might not be looking for this investment property, but you need to have a clear set of criteria that you use to make a decision. So you're not just emotionally, making moves. So next slide. Now, when you start looking at property, you need to analyze the income and expenses. I talked about this before. This is the most critical. Once you get 5+ units and above, this is the key determinant to values, the key way that we come up with the value of the property. If you're looking at something 2 to 4 units, it's still very important because this is the viability of the property. Imagine it like this. You buy a fourplex where you move into one unit and the rents from the tenants is enough to pay all the bills and your mortgage. Essentially, you're in there living rent or mortgage free. Okay. If you're buying for investment, this analysis is your return, the money that you put in. So here's the key. What you got to do is you got to analyze the rents. Now, way you do that when you're evaluating a property, you want to get what's called the rent roll from the people who's selling it. The rent roll is going to show you who the tenants are, how much they pay, when they move in, when they move out, the deposit amount, all of that. And that's going to total up what's called your gross schedule rents. Your gross schedule rents is the total amount of rent that you could bring in on a property if every unit was occupied and if everybody paid their rent. Sometimes that don't happen, but if that were to happen, that's why it's called gross schedule. That's what's on the schedule. Now what we start doing is taking away from that schedule. Okay, we take away things like vacancy. Vacancy is when somebody's got to move out of your unit and then you got to fix it up and then release it. During that time, you're not getting rent. That's called vacancy. Loss to lease or concessions is when, okay, sometimes you may see this here coming up. When someone leases a unit, they may say first month free. So they leased the unit, but for that rent, they didn't get no rental income. That's an example of a concession or loss to lease. Okay, now you take away from the schedule rents, but now you're going to add to the gross schedule rents with what's called other income. And it's just that simple. Any income that is not rental income is called other income. That could be laundry income, vending machine. Let me give you an example. I'm selling a fourplex in Oakland right now. The back of the building has a laundry room. The owners who own it, they're not utilizing it. They're using it as a storage room. So whoever buys that property has a great opportunity to develop a lot more income of other income by putting coin operated laundry in that laundry room so that their tenants can come in and first of all, the tenants have an amenity. Right now, the tenants in that building got to go down the street, take their laundry, go down there. Would you imagine the hassle of that versus just taking your laundry down to the back of the building, plop it in there? Then that's a form of income to the landlord. Very, very important. So the bottom line number of all of this calculation is what's called the effective gross income. Okay, that's what you actually collect on a building. Now, this analysis needs to be done by, I told you first, you want to get the rent roll from the people selling the property. Typically, that's going to be the broker. If it's not a broker, that's going to be the seller. Okay, but then you need to get what's called the seller's profit and loss statement. Okay, that's the accounting of all the profit and loss that they brought in, at least over the last 2 years. We like to get 2 to 3 years, but at least you need their statement over the last 2 to 3 years. And if you really want to get serious and dial into it, ask them for their Schedule E from their tax return, because that's what they reported to the IRS. And you really see what they're bringing in income, what they're paying out in expenses. Okay, that allows you to do your own analysis, because what you do is you look into the past in order to project the future. We not just shooting from the hip like, hey, I know I can go over and get this money over here, and I'm saying, oh, it's all good. I'm bringing in. A lot of people think, oh, the building's bringing in 10,000 a month. Oh, they're making millions. But if the building's bringing in 10,000 a month, right? And let's move to the next slide. If the building is bringing in effective gross income of 10,000 a month, but your expenses, operating expenses, are 11, then you're taking a loss on that. Okay, this is where we talk about the relationship of income and expenses. All right, you got to get that effective gross income first. You evaluate the past, analyze the past in order to project the future. All right, so once you've got your effective gross income number, now what you're going to look at is the operating expenses. Now notice here, I said operating expenses. This don't include the mortgage payment. Your mortgage payment is a capital expense. That's the cost of money. So if I pay cash for a building, I'm still going to have taxes, insurance, management, maintenance, utilities, repairs, reserves. I might have some landscaping. I might have some pest control. I might have some security. All of these things. I may have to evict someone, unfortunately. That's a cost as well. And those are what's called the cost of doing business, operating expenses. Not included in this number or in this calculation is your mortgage payment. Your mortgage payment comes next. But you take the effective gross income and now minus the operating expenses. You take away from the effective gross the operating expenses, you get a very important number on this next slide called net operating income. Okay, so you got our effective gross income minus the operating expenses. And as we move on to the next slide, we get our net operating income. Okay, this is your income minus your expenses, and particularly your effective gross income minus your operating expenses. This is essentially the net income is after accounting for all income sources minus all non-debt service expenses. Debt service is mortgage. Essentially, basically, it's what's left after you collect the rents, pay your bills, but before you pay your mortgage. This is the money you pay your mortgage with. All right. Now, this is also the value of the property. That's why you have to make sure that when you analyze your operating expenses, the mortgage payment is not in there. Because if you put the mortgage payment in that operating expense number, that's going to skew your net operating income number. And that's going to throw your value off, because once you get 5+ units, we look at the income approach to value as the primary way of evaluating the property. When you are 2 to 4 units, they're still going to include the net operating income and the cap rate as an analysis to the value, but it's going to be secondary to the market sales comparison. So market sales comparison in residential is when we look at other properties that have sold in your neighborhood, and we look at the price per square foot, the price per unit, and we look at that as the main way of valuing the property. And then if it's income property, the income is secondary. But once you hit 5+ units, this is the primary source of valuing the property. That's why the income and the expense relationship is so critical, because it's the value of your property. And that's why I talked about at the beginning of this thing is that in the Great Recession, many of us missed it because we didn't understand that. People didn't understand that. And as I was a young brother out there pushing these deals, I knew about these principles. And the people who saw the vision and bought, they made millions. Okay, and that opportunity is there for you, but you got to understand this. Now, moving on to the next one is the relationship to the net operating income and the value of the property. So in the next slide, this slide, I'll be talking about capitalization rate. Okay, essentially and in the business, by the way. So if you guys get out there, you start pounding the pavement, talking to brokers, talking to people, making moves, you're going to hear somebody say, what's the cap rate? What's the cap rate? Or you're going to see a marketing and it's going to refer to a cap rate. Cap rate is the capitalization rate, and essentially it's the rate of return generated by a real estate investment property based on the annual net operating income that a property generates. Basically, it represents the percentage return you would get from a building if you paid cash and didn't have a mortgage. Okay, so if you paid cash for a building and there was no mortgage, the net operating income will be the money you put in your pocket. That's your yield. Okay, and calculation for this, the formula of cap rate is net operating income, and that slang is NOI. So if you hear people say NOI, that's important. And just FYI, a lot of investment brokers and commercial real estate brokers, they're going to slang term you all day long because they want to see if you know what you're talking about. So just understanding a few of these key terms will help you be able to navigate through the market. Because a lot of people, they're very, I'm trying to think of a positive way to say it, but they ain't cool people, right? And they trying to, minimize you. So what you want to do is you want to have a clear understanding of these terms and what they mean. So cap rate is critical to understanding the value of the property. And essentially it's the NOI, net operating income, divided by the purchase price and or value. That is the cap rate. So that's a critical piece to understanding value. And on the next slide, I'll give you a formula for this. Now, I'll give you the numbers for this in the next slide. Here's the key. This concept took me a couple years to understand, and I'm good at math in general. and I'm a numbers person. So I just want you to understand, if this don't make sense to you today, right now, bear with me. I have some videos on my YouTube station where I go into the details about cap rate, net operating income, rates of return. Our YouTube station is Infinity Invest. You just go to YouTube and put in Infinity Investments, you'll see us, and where you can study this a little bit more. But essentially, here's an example. If the NOI equals 100,000 and the purchase price equals $1 million, we're solving for cap rate. I'm sorry, I got to go a little bit of algebra on y'all. You know, I told you I was the principal at my schoolhouse or whatever with my kids. So we're breaking out the algebra, y'all. But cap rate equals NOI divided by purchase price. So 100,000 divided by $1 million is simple math. And if you 10% return, it's, you know, I'm using, you know, easy numbers so y'all can get it, right? So here's what it means. If I went out there and I bought a building for $1 million, that's the purchase price, right? And the building generates NOI, like we just broke down what the NOI was. So income, expenses, what's left over, NOI. Remember, I paid cash, I ain't had no mortgage. That 100,000 is what I put in my pocket, right? That's my yield. So the building's cap rate, the building's capitalization rate, the yield, the return from the building is 10%. Put up my $1 million, I made 10% on my money. Okay, that's how the income is directly related to the value, y'all. And that is a simple formula that can make you millions, or it can hundreds of thousands, or at least get you in the game, or at least have you to know what's going on all up and around you. Okay, it's this formula. And remember, with cap rate, it is the exact opposite of the stock market. Stock market, you want to buy low, sell high, right? The same principle for real estate. You want to buy price where it's low, and when you sell it, if you sell it, it's when it's high. But the cap rate you want is the higher the better when you buy, the lower the better when you sell. And a high cap rate means higher return, and that's indicative, reflective. I'm sorry about using the big words, of the marketplace. And somebody just asked, what's a good cap rate? I think, let me see what the chat was. And that's going to depend on the market you're in. Oakland, different from San Francisco, different from Richmond, different from Stockton. In Oakland today, if you can get a 6% cap rate, 6% on your money, you hitting the ball out the park. You know, in San Francisco, if you can get a 4.5% to 5%, that's a grand slam. In Stockton, 6.5% to 7% is great. So it just depends. Now, if I go to Memphis, Tennessee, I need 9 or 10% to make it work. So that depends on your marketplace. That's why I say the cap rate is reflective of the market you're in. And you want to buy when the market is, the rates are higher. And when you sell, you want to time. If you were to sell, some of y'all just want to buy property, never sell it. That's kind of my philosophy. But sometimes you got to sell. Sometimes it makes sense to sell. So if and when you do sell, you want to time it to where the marketplace is willing to take less of a return. Big part of why the values in properties are propping up and they have not dropped so much is because cap rates are related to treasury bonds and the rates associated with them. And those rates are really, really low right now. So investors are used to making really low returns on their money. So that's why the price points are still so high. When in 2008, 2009, these, investors said, hey, if I'm going to put my money out there, I need to get a high rate of return because the risk is more. So I just want to, I don't want to spend too much time on this. This could be a little bit confusing. Like I said, hit up the YouTube to get more resources on this and understand this better. But just know that the net operating income directly reflects the value of a property because of the cap rate effect. Now, in the 2 to 4 unit world, like I said, that's not the primary way we value properties, but it's important because that income essentially is the viability of that property. So let's move to the next one. And I hope you guys, again, understand that. If you don't, take some time. There's a lot of books out there, a lot of resources to understand that. And again, if your only mission is to buy your house, cool. But you really want to understand what's really going on in the world of real estate, especially in the Bay Area, because a lot of these commercial developments and things affect you and your neighborhood. And we got to get to the point where we are informed and educated about these things, what's going on in our neighborhoods. So moving on to other terms, because I'm telling you guys that you need to know terms to be able to properly navigate through the business. So net cash flow is when you now take into account your mortgage paid. So net cash flow is simply the cash remaining after all expenses and the mortgage is paid. So net cash flow is basically your net operating income minus your mortgage payment. Okay. By the way, when we're calculating numbers, we always look at an annual snapshot. What do things look like over the year? Because in apartments, in business, life, things are going to fluctuate month to month. You do want to know what things are looking like month to month for sure, and then annualize that out, break that out over 12 months, okay? Especially when you're talking about rates of return. So your net cash flow is the cash remaining after all expenses and the mortgage is paid. The cash on cash return essentially is the net cash flow divided by the initial investment, or the cash invested, total cash invested, which is your down payment plus your closing costs, okay? The internal rate of return, that's really a measure for bigger institutions, but essentially that's the total return. When I say total return, and real estate is great because you make money on the income, but every time you make a mortgage payment, what are you doing? You're paying principal and interest. So a part of that mortgage payment goes to paying the property down. That's an element of return. Also, the property should be going up in value. It may go down, but over time, it's probably going to go up. It goes up and down. By the way, I'll be a real estate broker, but I like to keep it real with y'all. It don't always go up. It goes down too. So over time, it will definitely go up. So that's an element of return. And then also whether you have to pay taxes or you get a tax benefit from it will be specifically, and that is specific to your situation. But whether you have to pay taxes or you get a tax benefit, that is another measure of return. So internal rate of return calculates all those things. So just a couple key terms, and there's a couple more to kind of deal into on the next slide. And on the next slide, we're going to get into this measure, which is the cash on cash return, because this is what is important for you guys to understand, because this is the return of your cash. And that's important. You really want to know, if I put up X amount of dough, how much I'm going to get back? What's in it for me, right? I know I want to know about that. And so again, that formula is the annual net cash flow divided by your initial investment. It's also the total cash invested, right? Your initial investment. So let's just say on the property that we bought, that was $1 million and generated 100,000, if you will. Let's just say we got a mortgage for that. And the mortgage, after our net income of 100,000, we paid our mortgage, and the net cash flow was 15,000. Let's just say, and let's just say when we bought that property, we put $100,000 down. Now, when you're buying $1 million property, you got to put more money down than that. But this is just an example. However, I have bought $1 million properties with less money down with that using creative financing. I'll talk to you guys about that at the end of the presentation. But just rock with me on this. So if you put $100,000 down to invest into a property or buy a property, and you make annually $15,000 a year, your cash on cash return is 15%. 15,000 divided by 100,000, 15%, right? Ideally, you want to achieve double-digit cash on cash return. That means 10 plus, 10% or above. In the Bay Area, that's almost impossible today. A few years ago, that was all day long. In 2020, it's going to be tough. So if your cap rate is 6%, and let's just say you got a mortgage and your interest rate is 4%, then you may be making 7 to 8% on your money, but it's going to be very difficult to get to 10% in the Bay. Okay, you might, if you're going to be, let's say, going to Stockton or going out of state, you can get higher cash on cash returns, but there's a cost of that. There's a reason we pay for the high, cost of living in the Bay Area, because it's really one of the better places to live in the world. So the reality is, this measure, like cap rate, changes market to market. You just want to get, here's the biggest thing. You need to make sure that your cash on cash return is higher than your going in cap rate, higher than the cap rate on the building. Meaning that when you get a loan that increases the rate of return, it doesn't take away from it. And that's kind of like a rule of thumb. So just make sure. One thing I see a lot of investors make a mistake on is they are so anxious to get into the real estate. They're so anxious to buy property is they get overly ambitious, overly positive. I'm a positive person, you know what I mean? Believe in positivity, but when you're analyzing property, you kind of need to look at the worst case scenario, all right? The difference between the entrepreneurial mindset and the investor mindset. Entrepreneurs, we believe we can make anything happen no matter what. That's part of what it takes to be successful in an entrepreneur. As investors, we always looking at what's the worst case scenario. Can I make money in the worst case scenario? How can I avoid the worst case scenario? I don't want to have my money stuck into the worst case scenario. So investors and entrepreneurs have very similar mindsets, but that's where they differ. I want you guys to learn how to develop both, because I think we all need to develop our entrepreneurial skill set, that even if you work a 9 to 5, and you certainly all need to develop your investment mindset, because I don't think we can just rely on pensions and things like that to take care of us. I think we all need to be independent. So knowing your returns is really critical. We'll go to the next slide, and I'll wrap it up here quickly, and let me know if we need to speed things up. Nikki, just let me know. But now, let's say you have a building, and some of you may have a building. You may have a home, and you're thinking, well, how do I get into another property? Or how is my investment property doing? Okay, you analyze what's called the return on equity. So we just talked about your return on investment, your cash. Now this is return on equity, okay? And the equity of a property is the value of the property minus the loans and the cost of selling or refinance, okay? That's your equity, okay? And so what we do is we take your annual net cash flow and divide it by your property's net equity, and that gets us a measure. And for example, let's just say the same property, you are making $15,000 a year. And let's just say in the previous example, you put up $100,000 to buy that building. Well, let's just say you bought that building in 2015 and now it's 2020. So let's just say that $100,000 that you invested turned into $300,000 of equity, right? Which is pretty typical if you would have bought the 15 to today in 2020. So now your 100 grand of cash turned into 300,000 of equity. So you were making 15% on your cash, but now the formula is 15,000 of annual net cash flow divided by 300,000 of net equity equals 5%. And so the rule of thumb here is that the ROE, return on equity, diminishes as the property appreciates in value. Okay, so the more the property's value goes up, typically, unless your rents keep up with the same pace, which it usually does not, especially in rent control areas, ROE diminishes as the property value appreciates. And so a lot of property owners, once you get into property, some people say, I'm gonna get a property and never sell it. But some people, and here's a great formula of wealth. Here's a great way how many folks without the expansive means, or without coming from wealthy families, or without having a lot of cash to start, can really, really accelerate their net worth and really, really accelerate their generational wealth. And we'll roll to the next slide, because I'm going to give you an example of accelerating your cash flow, accelerating your return, if you will. So let's just say, like you had $15,000 on the $100,000 you invested, earning you 15%. Then that return on investment, you own the property for a few years, it jumped up to 300,000 in equity. Now it's 5%. You say, well, what if I sold the property and went and bought another property? And you did what's called a tax deferred exchange. You could take that 300,000 and go out and buy another property. Now the challenge in that, doing that, a lot of times, like right now, if you sell, you could probably sell, but it's difficult to buy, right? That's been the challenge over the last few years. But even if you bought and you weren't making as much money as a return that you did 5 years ago, let's just say you took that 300,000 and you made 10% on your money. That 10% is 30,000. So you were making 15,000 a year. You sold, bought another building. Now you're making 30,000 a year. 4 greenhouses, 1 red hotel. If you ever play Monopoly, that's how you win a game. That's how a lot of people move up in the world. Okay. And this is something that you all can do. Now, I, if you're starting with the house, if you're thinking about getting the fourplex, use that as a stepping stone. Many people want to try to get their dream house on the first one. Just get in there. Just get in there, because if you build equity, then you can make moves like this. And you don't even have to sell your property. You could take an equity line out, take that, go buy something else. But you get that first foundation, you're going to build on it. Now, I got a couple more slides, but I think I'd like to go to the last slide. There's two other slides in between this, but let's go to the last, not this one more, or another one. So I'll wrap up with this, or go back to that one, Simone, right here. Here's another thing to consider. You don't necessarily have to go to the bank to get a property. There's other ways of financing properties. I'm getting ready to do a seminar on this. I just did a video on this, but creative financing techniques, other people's money. If some of y'all are old timers like me, you might have remembered Carlton Sheets' No Money Down real estate course that used to always be coming on TV. Well, if you'd have ordered that course, that's one of the best courses in real estate history, because it teaches you how to do some of these techniques. Master lease options or lease options, land contracts, wraparound mortgages, seller carried first or seconds, joint venture partnerships, raising money through crowdfunding, preferred equity and mezzanine financing structure. These are techniques that I don't have time to break down to you now, but I want you to know that exist and are methods and means that where you could buy property with low to no money down, and usually you need some money down, but not 10% down or 5% down. And if you have bad credit, you can execute these strategies. I just want you all to be understanding and aware that there are options. The more you know, the more options that you have, the more you can expand your contacts and buy property. And buy property the smart way. When I say the smart way, properties that are going to positive cash flow, that are going to feed you. You don't want to buy properties that are going to eat you. Okay. And that's kind of my mission right now. I'm really driving this home with a lot of my clients and a lot of people I'm talking to, because everything I do, I want to make sure it's sustainable. I don't want to slam nobody into a deal, and then 5 years from now or 2 years from now, they're like, oh, I can't make the mortgage payments because this, and that. I want to make sure that going in, that you are making money, you're making positive cash flow. But I also want to let you know that there's alternatives, that there's just not one way of doing things. It's the biggest thing you can know about real estate, is that there's more than one way to skin a cat, if you will. There's more than one way to figure out a problem or solution. And I think that all of us, and I appreciate talking to y'all. I think this is my second or third time, Nikki, talking to the group. What I love about y'all, and is that having been born and raised in East Oakland, having came from a very difficult situation, is that we actually, if we harness it, we have an advantage. Because like I told y'all, when the market crashed in 2009, I was in Sotheby's in a market in Montclair in the Oakland Hills. So when we all had to start eating rice and beans and top ramens, it wasn't nothing for your boy, because I did that millions. It wasn't, I was straight. Some of the people in my office, they wasn't cool, you know what I mean? And they had some serious problems, you know what I mean? So as we go through these pandemics and then we go through this challenging situations, just remember that you got something in you, and from your ancestors and your life experiences, that has hardened you, that has shaped you, that has built you into something. All you got to go do is soak up this knowledge, get this knowledge in this context, and go out there and apply it. It ain't going to be easy. And that's what Nikki and Richmond Neighborhood Housing is here for, to assist you in that. I'm here for it. The realtors are here for you. It's the Urban Financial Services Coalition is here for you. The Black Accountants is here for you. We have power, but we just got to harness it, y'all. And stop talking about what they doing to us and this and that. What is our power? Figure that out and go on and out there and get it. So that's all I got. And I would love to get up into some questions and answers that y'all might have for me.
And Steve, we do have a couple of questions, and Simone will get to them shortly. So first, did not know not only were you a successful commercial broker, but you were a motivational speaker. Didn't know that part.
Well, thank you. Thank you. I appreciate that. Trying to push it out there.
And one of the other things I just wanted to confirm, at our organization, we started the tagline, changing the narrative of home ownership, because many people were not aware that you did need a 700 credit score, 20% down to get into a home. And to pivot to this conversation, I know many did not realize that you could buy multifamily units and be a first-time home buyer.
Yeah.
And there's something else in changing the narrative of using property as investment, is the one value you have in this situation is oftentimes the lender is not looking at you individually. They're looking at how the property is going to perform, which is
Right.
why I think what Steve shared is so valuable. So if there is any interest, it is worth having a conversation so you know what you're saying yes to and what you're saying no to. So with that, I'll turn it over to Simone and have her share some of the questions we've received.
Thank you,
Okay.
Nikki. That's valuable.
So the first question is, when do you believe the market will become a buyer market?
Well, okay, excellent question. So again, it depends on what product type, whether you are multifamily, single family, other commercial real estate. Single family, let's talk about that for a minute. Right now, it's interesting because there's still properties selling for above the listing price, multiple offers. But again, I don't think that's going to last forever. Now, I don't exactly know when that's going to shift, but here's a couple of my ideas and thoughts. First of all, we have an election coming up. Ain't nobody talking about that right now, but there is an election coming up. And typically in election years, so before COVID, all of the forecasts and projections said that this economy is going to continue to roll probably into 2021. And then when in 2021, because we've been rolling up for so long, at some point there's an inevitable, you know, um, you know, recession, slowdown, if you will. Now with COVID, everything's been disrupted, right? But what's happening is the Fed is pumping all this money into the system that has kind of falsely inflated things. Remember what I said earlier, the difference between the Great Recession and now is that mortgage companies are lending, banks are lending, and the SBA almost giving away money, if you will. The Feds are just printing money. So today, in the single family home market, in the Bay Area at least, it may not look like COVID did anything. However, that's not the reality. That's a short-term situation. Okay, 30-something million people was unemployed. Several businesses are not coming back. The way we do things when we get out of this is going to be different. School districts are going to have challenges. The state, the city, all of them are in. I think San Francisco's in $1 billion deficit right now. City of San Francisco. That we're going to feel that at some point. So I think things will shift. Certainly, if not right after the election, regardless of whoever gets in there. It's not a political thing. It's just until that point, things are going to, the powers that be now are going to continue pumping. If they get in, the existing regime gets in and continues, they don't have to keep pumping. They got in there. Now they can do whatever they want to do. If it's a new regime that gets in there, they're going to change up and there's going to be a shift, and that's probably going to cause a downturn, or not a downturn, but there's going to be uncertainty. So sometime between when the Fed stop putting all this money in the system, and I think in July, they're going to stop paying all the unemployment money, but I don't know, and giving all the loans. Sometime between then and the election, I think that we'll start seeing a shift to a buyer's market. I don't know that. I don't have a crystal ball, but certainly after the election, at some point, I think we're going to see a shift in the housing as buyer's market. In multifamily, I would say it's not clearly a buyer's market as of yet, but buyers are able to negotiate. Where in the last few years, it's been very difficult for buyers. You pretty much had to just give the seller what they want and figure out how to negotiate where you can, unless you find deals that are off the market. So for single family homes, I think some point between when the Fed stops printing money and the election happens, when it'll shift into a buyer's market, I think multifamily and commercial real estate, it'll be more like this summer, like in the next month or two, that buyers will start being able to negotiate for. I don't think that prices are going to drop severely. I think more so volume, the amount of properties getting sold is going to drop. And then I think deals will be negotiated because of the Fed pumping all the money, and because a lot of people having had to in the past actually qualify for loans. They're not going to walk away from properties. There's not going to be a lot of foreclosures. I don't think the prices are going to drop crazy. I just think you'll be able to negotiate and not have to go against 15 and 20 people every property. So I hope that gives you some hope and some insights to where we might be.
Thank you, Steve. I think we have some more questions. Simone?
How can a person know if they are ready to become a property owner?
Well, that's a great question. First, before your finances, it starts with your mindset. Okay, it starts with your mindset, because you might have just be coming out of bankruptcy, no money in the bank. But if you have the mentality and the mindset of I'm ready, now you can then go and put a plan in place. So first you have to be mentally ready. Okay, and what I mean by mentally ready is you understand what owning a property means. If you're owning a home, you understand you can't call the landlord and say, come fix these toilets. You got to fix them toilets, and you don't necessarily have to fix it, but you got to call a plumber to fix it. So you got to have a couple of coins to be able to make that happen. You have to have the understanding that, I got to pay a mortgage payment now. It's a little bit different than paying rent. Okay. And that this is a long-term deal. You know what I mean? You're in it for the long term. Okay. If you're buying investment property, you got to understand the numbers like we talked about right now. And then you go and get your finances together. Technically, just going to a bank, you're going to need to have 3 to 6 months of your expenses in the bank as reserves, if not more, because they want to see you have that typically after you put your down payment money. And you want to be able to, whatever your mortgage payment is, you don't want that to be more than 45 to 50% of your total income. And that's a tough number. That's like the limit, right? The max. Really, you want it to be under that, but you certainly don't want it to be over that. And so those are just a couple indicators. But my thing is this: before the finance piece, it starts here. Then you go get the finances together, because you could be starting from bankruptcy and be ready in a couple, 3 years. And what I told you at the end of the presentation about creative financing, you could be in bankruptcy and buy a property the next month. I know several people who did it. So that's why, I'm saying it starts with your mentality, and then you figure out the finances, then you figure out the strategy and where you want to go. And you can develop your mindset by what you're doing tonight, that you're developing your mindset, going on YouTube, reading books, continuing the journey. Like Nikki said, change the narrative up here. And you do that by going and getting all this knowledge and information, connecting with people that's like-minded. So that's where it first starts. And when you in your mind feel like you're ready, then you go apply that to the financial principles. You get your credit up, you get your savings up, and you get, get your income up. And discipline yourself, discipline your spending, by the way. You don't want to be, a lot of us spend a lot of money unnecessarily on stuff that doesn't bring us value. So those are the keys, I think, to getting ready.
Okay. Simone, any other questions?
Yes, we have 2 more. So someone owns a home in which it has recently increased in value. Can you briefly describe how to use the 1031 to purchase another property?
So great question. Now, let me just preface this. You only need to do a 1031 exchange if that house is an investment property. So for instance, if you sell an investment property, meaning that you have it rented out or you're using that property for your business, when you sell that property, you would have to pay capital gains. That's the tax on the gain, the profit. Okay. If you're in your house that is your residence and it's gone up in value and you want to sell it and buy more property, if you're single, you can make up to $250,000 and not pay any taxes. If you're married, you can make up to $500,000 and not pay any taxes. There's some other rules surrounding how much money you make and all of that, but just in general, if you sell your home residence, you can make $500,000, take that money, and then go buy something without any taxes. But let's just say the house that you're talking about was an investment property. So now when you sell that property, any gain is taxable. So when you do what's called a 1031 exchange, you take all of the money and you buy another property. You have to follow some specific guidelines. But when you do that, you defer having to pay the capital gains taxes. You need to set up what's called a qualified intermediary account with a company that does that before you close escrow. The money comes from escrow. It don't go to you. It goes to the qualified intermediary's account. Then from that account, you have to select properties. You have 45 days from the day you close to select the 3 properties that you would then invest in. And the money would then come from the qualified intermediary to that other investment property. The rules of thumb are this: if you sell a property, whatever price point you sold, you have to buy that amount of properties or more in order to not pay any taxes, right? So if you sold $1 million property, you have to buy $1 million worth of property. That can be broken up into 3 separate properties, but the total price points or values have to be $1 million or more, okay, in order for it. So you have to exchange up in order to do so. So, and if you're able to do that, you can really accelerate what you're doing. You don't have to do it if that home is your personal residence, but if it is an investment property, that's how you would do it. And here's the tip on that. Before you sell the property, you want to try to find a property to buy. It's hard to do because those dates and times are hard and fast. It can be tough. So if you're going to do an exchange, and that's something you can reach out to me, I can help you out with that. But if you're going to do that, you want to make sure you identify the properties you want to purchase before you sell or close on the property that you're exchanging out of. So again, I hope that was clear and helps out.
And we have one more question. How and where can I find out more about creative financing?
Well, a great question. There's a lot of stuff on the internet. If you go to my YouTube station, Infinity Investments, my most recent video was on creative financing, or you just go to Google and YouTube, Google search creative financing, you'll probably find my creative financing for real estate. You'll probably find my video. There's a lot of books on it. The best course in history, though, for creative financing is Carlton Sheets, No Money Down. It's not in print anymore. And if you're an old timer, you was around in the 90s watching late night infomercials, you've definitely seen that commercial before. I've been in several courses. I got my CCIM designation. That's the toughest every education you can go through in commercial real estate. Carlton Sheets, No Money Down real estate course. You can still find it on eBay though. So if you want to go on eBay, you could buy it for like a couple $100. It's the best resource. There's also a book by Robert Allen. I believe the name of it is No Money Down Real Estate. So there's just a couple resources. I'm going to be doing a seminar though in 2 weeks on July 10th on the topic of creative financing. And Nikki, I'll maybe get that link to you if you want to share it, because I do think in this market going forward, I don't think prices are going to jump off a cliff. I really don't think that's going to happen. They might come down a little bit, but I do think sellers will start doing a lot more creative financing in order to get their price, because they put a lot of cash and effort into their properties. They ain't going to walk away like before. So I think there will be a great opportunity for lease options to buy, land contracts, wraparound mortgages. A lot of that stuff I think we're going to see in the near future.
Well, you are hitting it right on target. We are at our time, but I want to leave everybody with this and validate the information. So we sent out a poll. I wanted to get a temperature check of how everybody was feeling. 78% are feeling good about the information. Only 22% was feeling overwhelmed, but a whopping 67% are motivated to move forward. It looks like one more question popped up. So Simone, if there is one, I'll give everyone a minute, but I do want to take everyone's attention to the chat box. There is a survey we ask after every one of these to let us know how we're doing, what's working well, what's not. We do appreciate those that had to move around their schedule to address the time change, because we did get feedback that 4 p.m. was a little early for folks, assuming that just because we're home, it's not that we're not working. So thank you for that. I do want to leave, if you have any interest in this, because I know most of you are not currently homeowners and that you would be going down the path of first time home ownership, please contact our organization first, because we do want you to be mindful of the resources in which you get information, because this is not the time to get too creative. You definitely want to have folks that you trust, that are knowledgeable, so that they guide you in the way in which you need to be guided. And I think Steve has done a great job of validating that. So Simone, is there one more question in the Q&A?
Yes. So I'm going to read it out. Speaking of Stockton, I got a text message from an investor who wants to buy my home in an exclusive area in Stockton. This was the same trend I saw happening in Oakland when the tech people started buying their property. What's happening?
Well, yeah, okay. So investors are always going to, and no matter what the market conditions are, investors are typically always out there, looking to buy property. And what investors will do, let me just give you an idea of how an investment business works, is investors pick an area, pick a farm area. So the reason why you're saying, why you're seeing it in your area of Stockton is because Stockton is very popular right now. Same thing that happened in the Bay Area when the tech boom happened. So people want to invest typically in areas that are growing. If you're investing in an area that's dying, it's not a good business plan. But you want to try to find an area. I totally believe in Stockton. I've been hot on Stockton the last couple of years, not just because it's cheap. They're building up the infrastructure of that city. They got a great mayor that's doing some things in there. The port is building up. The downtown is coming around. I think that's going to be a major city in the next 5, 10 years. That's why you're seeing people reaching out, and you're going to see people reach out. Investors are going to reach out to people whether they're in default or not in default, because an investor, a lot of times you have to find properties that are not listed on the public market in order to make a good buy. Make a good buy, you got to go find something else. So don't don't worry about it. And you can just, people reaching out to you, you can tell them, hey, no, I'm not selling right now. I'm tell them, hey, I'm looking to buy. You got something? But understand, if people are reaching out to you, it's because number one, you're in a good area, right? Number two, people are looking for opportunity. And if people are, now another thing is, as we transition out of this, if people are in default or people are having some problems with their mortgage, that becomes public knowledge. And people that are searching for properties are going to search those type of opportunities, and then they're going to reach out. And you don't have to talk to them. Some people are shady and shisty. Some people might offer a solution, but just understand it's business. And that's why this is important for us to have this conversation with the community, because we have to understand how business works. They're reaching out to you because your neighborhood is popular and Stockton is growing, and people are trying to say, I want to get in on that. So you should be looking at how you can go snatch some properties up yourself in that area some more. Looks like you're already in there, but that's what's happening in Stockton. It's pushing out there. I think you're going to see companies starting to come to Stockton. Amazon already opened up a distribution center, I think, by French Camp. More companies will be coming to Stockton. More people will be coming to Stockton. So just get prepared for it. That's why Stocktonians that's out there, y'all need to mount up too and buy back your own blocks and start buying some properties, because people from the Bay have already been coming. They're going to continue coming in. And once the companies start coming, that's when it starts getting more expensive. But if you're on the ground floor there, my message is to you, figure out how to buy some property. And for y'all who are saying, hey, maybe this is a little bit overwhelming, I feel y'all, because I was in that same spot. It's all good though. Take the little nuggets that you did learn, apply that to your situation. And if whatever you're trying to do, if you're just trying to buy a first time home, dial into that. All your resources goes into learning that. And something that is overwhelming to you today, you can master in 3 months or 2 months, over a period of time. Okay, so don't be discouraged if you aren't over. It's cool, but just understand. Take something that you are interested in, any nugget that you learn, and really go all in on that. Now is the time for that, because like what the lady said, or the gentleman, whoever was that said about the property in Stockton. Stockton is going to be hot. Bay Area is already hot and it's been that, but Stockton is going to be the next growth area. So time to hop on that is now. But wherever your neighborhood is, take ownership of it. That's my message.
And you know what, Steve, you bring up a good point, and we can definitely keep the dialogue going based on people's, time. But prior to COVID, commute was a big thing.
Yeah.
I lived in Stockton for almost 11 years, but fortunately for me, my life was maintained there. And like the last 3 years, I had to come back to the Bay Area. And during that time, I didn't know how people could do that commute every day because it was crazy.
Yeah, it's tough. Yeah.
However, post-COVID, employers, as even we had this conversation with staff today, we're learning that work can be done differently. So I can actually see a trend in the market changing where the outer areas that weren't as popular become popular, because now people are truly telecommuting, working remotely, and all of the things that we've had to adjust to. So to the points that were made earlier, you might want to have a different perspective of area, because distance may no longer be an issue because we've gotten used to social distance.
Huge point. Huge point. A lot of tech companies are saying to their people, "Hey, y'all, we're just as efficient with y'all at home than y'all been in here." And then I don't have to. If I think it was Twitter or somebody saying they're not going to renew their lease. I mean, they have a very expensive lease downtown San Francisco. They're probably going to renegotiate versus renew, right? So that's probably going to be a new reality as we come back. And I don't know when I say come back to normal. I don't know if normal. I mean, normal is probably different. I don't want to say the new normal because everybody keeps saying that, but I mean, things are different. And one thing is, this, like how we're doing this right now. I run a real estate brokerage, for instance, in Oakland. A lot of I have agents in San Jose, Antioch, all over. I have higher attendance on my weekly meetings since COVID than I ever had because I can have them on Zoom and people could just be in their living room or wherever on their phone, hop on the meeting versus having to drive all the way to Oakland, sit down, go in our meeting. We we're actually becoming more efficient that way, and a lot of companies are figuring out the same thing. So we're going to shift when that means, like what you just said, the outlying areas, the Antiochs. By the way, I think Pittsburgh and Bay Point. I'm a big three cities I really love: Pittsburgh, Bay Point, Vallejo, and Stockton. I think those are just great cities that are going to see that have infrastructure. Vallejo and Stockton went through bankruptcy, and they came out of that. And sometimes when you come out of bankruptcy, you a lot of the debt that the city was carrying before, they don't have it no more. So they can put capital and resources into the infrastructure that of the city, which is what Stockton is doing, and that's going to fuel growth. So I think Vallejo, Bay Point, Pittsburgh, and Stockton are going to be great places to invest. And you may or may not be able to live there, but if you are, fantastic. But if you're just thinking about investing, which everybody needs to think about it, whether if you're a first-time home buyer, have it in your mind. When you go get your home, get that home, get your feet up under you, then be thinking about your next move. Seriously.
Well, thank you, Steve. It's always a pleasure to engage with you. Again, I think highly of you and your information, and it sounds like you were able to give some really good, solid points, people walking away with the motivation to move forward. Contact us at Richmond Neighborhood Housing Services if you want to learn how to get into our programs. You can reach out to Keisha at eastbaynhs.org. You've been in contact with her as we were probably coordinating this event. So thank you. You guys have a great evening. One more question. Great workshop. So I think that's going to conclude our night. Thank you again, Steve. Everyone stay healthy, stay safe, stay in place, and be well.
All right, y'all. Peace out. Peace out. Much love and respect for y'all and y'all families.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
All right now.